I stood at my bedroom window, watching $20,000 worth of outdoor kitchen equipment being crushed into twisted metal and broken stone. Corinne Thompson was screaming at the county bulldozer operator, her bathrobe flapping in the morning breeze as she tried to physically block the massive machine. "You cannot do this. This is my property. I have invested everything into this patio." The bulldozer did not stop. It rolled forward with mechanical precision, reducing her elaborate fire pit to rubble in seconds. Corinne fell to her knees in the dirt, sobbing as years of her illegal construction project disappeared under tons of steel and diesel power. But this moment of justice did not happen overnight. It took months of psychological warfare, legal battles, and discovering the dark truth about my HOA president neighbor. Corinne had been stealing land from homeowners for years, using her position of power to intimidate and manipulate anyone who dared to challenge her. What started as a simple property dispute became a fight for my sanity, my home, and my basic rights as a homeowner. This is how I finally stopped her. Moving day arrived on a perfect September morning. The sun painted everything golden as I pulled into the driveway of my new home at 1247 Maple Ridge Drive. After years of apartment living, I finally owned a piece of the American dream. The house was a modest three-bedroom colonial, but what sold me was the corner lot. Nearly half an acre of beautiful green space stretched behind the house, more yard than I ever imagined owning. I was unloading boxes when she appeared at my fence line. Corinne Thompson looked like the perfect suburban neighbor. Well-dressed, perfectly styled blonde hair, and a warm smile that seemed genuinely welcoming. She carried a plate of homemade cookies and radiated the kind of confidence that comes from knowing everyone in the neighborhood. "You must be our new neighbor. Welcome to Maple Ridge. I am Corinne Thompson, the HOA president. I live right next door." She gestured toward the large brick house that dominated the adjacent lot. "I brought you some chocolate chip cookies, my grandmother's recipe." I thanked her and invited her inside for coffee. As we sat in my empty living room, Corinne began pointing out the various features of the neighborhood. She spoke with authority about property values, community standards, and the importance of maintaining curb appeal. Everything she said made sense, and I felt lucky to have such an organized community leader as my neighbor. "Your backyard is absolutely beautiful," Corinne said, gazing through my sliding glass door. "I hope you do not mind, but I have been maintaining part of your lot for the past few years. The previous owner, Mr. Henderson, was elderly and could not keep up with the landscaping. I took it upon myself to extend my flower beds and stone work into your yard as a neighborhood beautification project." I looked where she was pointing. About 15 feet of my backyard had been transformed into an elaborate landscaped area with decorative stones, flower beds, and what looked like an expensive irrigation system. It was beautiful work, but something felt wrong about the way she described it. "I spent thousands of dollars on that landscaping," Corinne continued. "I am sure you will appreciate not having to worry about maintaining that section. It really adds value to both our properties." The way she said it made it sound like I should be grateful, like she had done me some enormous favor by spending money on my property without asking. I tried to process what she was telling me. This woman had been using my land for years, and now she expected me to just accept it. "I appreciate the work you have done," I said carefully, "but I was planning to landscape the entire backyard myself. I have some specific ideas about how I want to use the space." Corinne's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her eyes. "Oh, I am sure we can work something out. We are all about community cooperation here in Maple Ridge. I have invested so much time and money into that area. It would be such a shame to tear it all up now. She finished her coffee and stood to leave. Think about it. I am sure you will see the benefits of keeping things as they are. After all, good neighbors help each other out. After she left, I stood in my backyard examining the landscaped area more closely. The work was professional and expensive, but it was also clearly designed to serve Corinne's property, not mine. The irrigation lines ran back to her house. The flower beds were positioned to be viewed from her patio, not my windows. I had bought this house for the large corner lot, the space, the privacy. Now I was learning that 15 feet of my property had been claimed by my neighbor, and she expected me to just accept it. The perfect neighborhood suddenly felt like a trap, and I was just beginning to understand what I had walked into. For the first 6 months, I tried to ignore the situation. I focused on settling into my new home, learning my job, and building a life in Maple Ridge. The landscaped area in my backyard remained unchanged, and Corinne continued to maintain it as if it were her own property. Every morning, I would see her watering the flowers and trimming the hedges that sat 15 feet inside my property line. I told myself it was not worth the conflict. The work was beautiful, and I was too busy to deal with landscaping anyway. Maybe this was just how things worked in suburban neighborhoods. Maybe I was being too territorial about a few square feet of grass and flowers. But then I noticed the stone patio. What started as a small decorative stone border had grown into a full patio extension. Corinne had added several tons of flagstone, creating an elegant outdoor seating area that stretched 20 feet into my backyard. The new stonework connected seamlessly with her existing patio, creating one massive outdoor living space that happened to be built half on my property. I knew I had to say something. I waited until a Saturday morning when Corinne was outside watering her flowers. I walked over to the fence line and called out in my most neighborly voice. "Good morning, Corinne. Could I talk to you for a minute about the patio?" She looked up with that same warm smile, but I was beginning to recognize the calculation behind it. "Of course, dear. What about it?" "Well, I noticed it has gotten quite a bit larger. It looks like it extends pretty far into my yard now." Corinne set down her watering can and walked over to the fence. "Oh, that old thing. I have been working on that patio for years. I have always maintained that area, ever since the Henderson family lived here. They were so grateful for the improvements I made to their property value." "But Corinne, according to my property survey, that entire area is on my lot. I have the deed and the boundary markers to prove it." Her expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Honey, I have been living here for 15 years. I know exactly where the property lines are. I have invested thousands of dollars in that landscaping and stonework. The previous owners were perfectly happy with the arrangement. I understand you have invested money, but I need to use my entire yard. I am planning to put in a vegetable garden and maybe build a workshop back there." Corinne's voice took on a patronizing tone. "A vegetable garden, in that beautiful landscaped area, that would be such a shame, and I am not sure the HOA would approve of a workshop. We have very strict guidelines about outbuildings and property aesthetics." I felt my temperature rising. The HOA cannot stop me from using my own property. Actually, as HOA president, I can tell you that we absolutely can regulate what homeowners do with their properties. It is all in the covenants and restrictions you signed when you bought the house. She reached into her back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Actually, I happen to have a copy of the agreement I had with Mr. Henderson. He gave me explicit permission to maintain and improve that area of the yard. I have been operating under that agreement for over 5 years." I looked at the paper. It was a handwritten note on plain paper, supposedly signed by the previous owner, giving Karen permission to maintain and beautify the backyard area. Something about it looked wrong, but I could not put my finger on what. I would need to verify this with my real estate attorney, I said. Karen's smile turned cold. Of course, you do what you need to do, but I hope you will think carefully about disrupting the harmony of our neighborhood. Word travels fast in a community like this. People do not like troublemakers. That evening, I called 3 of my neighbors to ask about the situation. Each conversation was polite but unhelpful. Yes, they had noticed Karen's improvements to the backyard. No, they did not know the details about property lines. Yes, Karen had mentioned that I was having some adjustment issues with the neighborhood standards. I realized Karen had been managing the narrative, painting me as the difficult newcomer who was disrupting the established order. I was not just fighting for my property anymore. I was fighting for my reputation in the community I had just joined. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out exactly what Karen Thompson was really up to. 3 weeks after our fence line conversation, I came home from work to find construction equipment in my backyard. Karen had hired a crew to install an elaborate outdoor kitchen on my property. Not near the property line, not partially on my land, but completely and obviously on my side of the fence. I stood in disbelief as workers installed a built-in grill, a stone countertop, and what looked like a pizza oven. The entire structure was clearly designed to serve Karen's patio, but it sat 15 feet inside my property line. When I approached the work crew, they told me they were working for Mrs. Thompson and had been instructed not to discuss the project with anyone else. I called Karen immediately. She did not answer. I called again, still no answer. I walked over to her house and knocked on the door. No response, even though I could see her car in the driveway. That weekend, Karen threw a neighborhood barbecue party. She sent invitations to every house on the block except mine. I watched from my kitchen window as 30 people gathered in my backyard grilling food on the outdoor kitchen that had been built on my property. Karen played hostess, showing off her new outdoor entertainment space to impress neighbors. She posted photos on the neighborhood Facebook group with captions like, "So grateful for this beautiful outdoor space," and "nothing better than entertaining friends in the backyard." She tagged the location as her address, as if the entire area belonged to her. I tried to attend the HOA meeting the following Tuesday. When I arrived at the community center, I was told the meeting had been moved to a different location. No one could tell me where. I later found out the meeting had been held at Karen's house, and only select board members had been invited. 2 days later, I received a formal letter from the HOA. I was being cited for harassment of board members and failure to maintain property standards. The letter claimed I had been aggressive and threatening toward Karen, and that my front lawn was below community standards because I had not yet installed landscape lighting. The harassment charge was completely fabricated. The property maintenance citation was for issues that did not exist. But the letter was official, on HOA letterhead, and it demanded that I pay a $300 fine within 10 days or face additional penalties. I called the HOA management company listed on the letter. They told me that all complaints had to be filed through the board president, Karen Thompson. I was supposed to appeal my citation to the person who had filed it in the first place. Over the next month, Karen's invasion of my property became more brazen. She installed outdoor speakers that played music until late at night. She put up decorative lighting that was clearly visible from my bedroom window. She even installed a small shed on my property to store her patio furniture and grilling supplies. When I tried to document the violations with photos, Corinne accused me of harassment and surveillance. She filed a police report claiming I was taking inappropriate pictures of her property. The officer who responded was polite, but clearly thought this was a petty neighbor dispute that would resolve itself. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning in November. I was getting ready for work when I heard construction noise in my backyard. I looked out to see Corinne supervising the installation of a 6-foot privacy fence that ran directly through my property. The fence was positioned to block my access to the area she had claimed, effectively cutting off nearly a quarter of my backyard. I ran outside in my work clothes and confronted the fence installers. They showed me a work order signed by Corinne Thompson, with my address listed as the installation site. When I explained that I had not authorized any fence installation, they became confused and uncomfortable. "Ma'am, we were hired to install this fence by the property owner. Mrs. Thompson said she owns this area of the yard." "Mrs. Thompson does not own this area. This is my property. I have the deed to prove it." Corinne appeared at that moment, dressed in her gardening clothes and carrying a cup of coffee. She looked completely calm and in control. "Is there a problem here?" she asked the workers. "This lady says she owns this property and did not authorize the fence." Corinne looked at me with theatrical concern. "Oh, honey, I think you are confused about the property lines. This fence is being installed on my property. I have every right to put up a fence on my own land." I was shaking with rage. "Corinne, you know this is my property. You are stealing my land." "I am not stealing anything. I am protecting my investment. If you have a problem with where I put my fence, you can take it up with the county." That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to take it up with the county. But first, I was going to find out exactly what Corinne had been doing and to whom. I took a vacation day and drove to the county courthouse with a folder full of documents. My property deed, my survey, my closing paperwork, and every piece of correspondence I had received from Corinne and the HOA. I was going to get to the bottom of this situation once and for all. The property records office was located in the basement of the courthouse, a fluorescent-lit maze of filing cabinets and computer terminals. The clerk, a woman named Sandra who had been working there for 20 years, listened to my story with growing interest. "So your neighbor claims she has permission to build on your property, but you never gave that permission?" she asked. "That is correct." She showed me a handwritten note supposedly from the previous owner, but I have never seen any official documentation. Sandra pulled up my property on her computer system. The screen showed a detailed map of my lot, with precise boundary lines and measurements. There was no question about where my property ended and Corinne's began. The outdoor kitchen, the extended patio, and the new fence were all clearly on my side of the line. "Let me check the records for any easements or agreements that might have been filed," Sandra said. She typed for several minutes, checking various databases and record systems. "I am not finding any legal agreements that would give your neighbor permission to use your property." "What about the note she showed me from the previous owner?" Sandra shook her head. "A handwritten note would not be sufficient for something like this. Any agreement that affects property rights would need to be properly notarized and filed with the county. I am not seeing anything like that in your records." She printed out several pages of documents for me, including a detailed property survey and a list of all recorded agreements and easements. My property was clean. Corinne had no legal right to use any part of my land. "There is something else you should know," Sandra said. I have been seeing more situations like this lately. Homeowners in HOA communities claiming they have rights to use other people's property. Sometimes it is a misunderstanding, but sometimes it is deliberate. She lowered her voice. If you suspect your neighbor is doing this to other people, you might want to check the complaint records. We keep files on all property disputes and violations. I spent the next 3 hours reviewing complaint records for my neighborhood. What I found made my blood run cold. Corinne Thompson had been involved in property disputes with 6 different homeowners over the past 8 years. In each case, she had claimed the right to use or modify her neighbor's property for community improvement or property maintenance. Most of the complaints had been resolved quietly, with homeowners eventually giving up or moving away. But the pattern was clear. Corinne was not just taking my land. She was systematically claiming pieces of property throughout the neighborhood, using her position as HOA president to intimidate and manipulate homeowners into compliance. The most disturbing discovery came when I reviewed the HOA financial records, which were public documents filed with the state. Corinne had been billing the HOA for thousands of dollars in community maintenance and property improvement expenses. But when I cross-referenced the expenses with the complaint records, I realized she had been using HOA funds to pay for improvements to property she was stealing from individual homeowners. She was not just taking our land. She was making us pay for the privilege through our HOA fees. I called the state attorney general's office that afternoon. The fraud investigation unit was very interested in what I had discovered. They told me that HOA fraud was a growing problem, and that cases involving both property theft and financial mismanagement were taken very seriously. "We need you to document everything," the investigator told me. "Every conversation, every letter, every expense. If Mrs. Thompson has been doing this systematically, we need to build a comprehensive case." I spent the rest of the week reaching out to other homeowners in my neighborhood. Once I started asking the right questions, the stories came pouring out. Corinne had been bullying and intimidating people for years. She had taken parts of yards, installed improvements without permission, and used her HOA authority to silence anyone who complained. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow 3 houses down, had been paying Corinne's landscaping bills for 2 years because Corinne convinced her it was an HOA requirement. The Johnsons had given up a portion of their driveway because Corinne claimed it was needed for community snow removal. The Hendersons, my house's previous owners, had moved away specifically to escape Corinne's harassment. I was not just fighting for my property anymore. I was fighting for every homeowner who had been victimized by Corinne's systematic fraud and intimidation. The case I was building would expose years of abuse and potentially result in criminal charges. But first, I had to confront Corinne publicly. I had to make her face the evidence of what she had been doing, and I had to do it in front of the entire neighborhood, so everyone could see exactly who Corinne Thompson really was. The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for the first Tuesday of December. For the first time in months, I received proper notice of the meeting location and time. I suspect Corinne thought she could control the situation better if she faced me in her usual environment, surrounded by neighbors who had been listening to her version of events. I arrived at the community center 30 minutes early, carrying a folder thick with documents, property surveys, financial records, complaint histories, and photographs of every violation Corinne had committed on my property. I had also invited my attorney, Sarah Chen, who specialized in property disputes and HOA law. The meeting room filled up quickly. Word had spread through the neighborhood that there was going to be a confrontation between Corinne and me. People who had not attended an HOA meeting in years were suddenly very interested in community governance. Karen entered the room like she owned it, which in many ways she did. She had controlled this HOA for so long that most people could not imagine the community without her leadership. She wore a navy blue blazer and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never been successfully challenged. "Good evening, everyone," Karen began, calling the meeting to order. "I know we have some issues to discuss tonight, but I want to start by addressing some unfortunate rumors that have been circulating in our community." She looked directly at me. "It has come to my attention that some people have been spreading false information about our community leadership and making baseless accusations about property management. I want to assure everyone that all HOA activities are conducted in accordance with our covenants and state law." I stood up. "Karen, I would like to address the community about the property violations you have committed on my lot." "I am afraid that is not appropriate for this meeting. If you have a personal dispute, you need to file a complaint through proper channels." "I have filed complaints through proper channels. You are the proper channels. You are also the person I am filing complaints against. I think that presents a conflict of interest." Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen's composure slipped slightly, but she maintained her authoritative tone. "I am not going to allow this meeting to be disrupted by personal attacks and false accusations." My attorney stood up. "Mrs. Thompson, my client has documented evidence of multiple violations of property law and HOA regulations. She has the right to present this evidence to the community." Karen's face flushed red. "I do not know who you are, but this is a private HOA meeting. You have no authority here." "Actually, HOA meetings are required to be open to all homeowners and their representatives. I am Ms. Johnson's legal representative." I opened my folder and pulled out the property survey. "I would like to show everyone the official county survey of my property at 1247 Maple Ridge Drive." I walked to the front of the room and held up the document. "This survey shows that Karen Thompson has built thousands of dollars worth of improvements on my property without my permission. An outdoor kitchen, patio extensions, a storage shed, and a fence that blocks my access to my own backyard." Karen shot up from her seat. "That is completely false. I have maintained that property for years with full permission from the previous owners." "Karen, I have checked the county records. There is no filed agreement giving you permission to use my property. The handwritten note you showed me is not legally valid. I have invested thousands of dollars in those improvements. I have maintained that area for 5 years." "With whose permission and with whose money?" I pulled out the HOA financial records. "These are the official HOA financial filings with the state. They show that you have been billing the HOA for thousands of dollars in property improvements. But those improvements were made on property you do not own, using money from homeowners who did not consent to the expense." The room erupted in angry voices. Homeowners started shouting questions at Karen about HOA finances and property management. I could see several people checking their phones, probably looking up their own property records. Karen was losing control of the situation. Her face was bright red, and her hands were shaking. "You do not understand the complexities of community management. I have been working to improve property values for everyone by stealing our land and making us pay for it." "I am not stealing anything. I have rights. I have invested everything into this community." Her voice was getting higher and more hysterical. "You people do not appreciate what I have done for this neighborhood. I have given years of my life to make this place beautiful." Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow, stood up slowly. Karen, did you make me pay for landscaping on my own property? That was a community expense. It benefited everyone. But it was my property. You charged me $600 to plant flowers in my own yard. Other voices joined in. The Johnsons asked about their driveway. The Millers questioned a fence repair they had been charged for. Karen's system of intimidation and fraud was crumbling in real time. I am not going to sit here and be attacked by ungrateful homeowners, Karen screamed. I have done everything for this community. I have sacrificed my own money and time. With respect, Karen, the financial records show you have been reimbursing yourself quite generously for those sacrifices. Karen grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. I am going to fight this. I am going to sue all of you. I have rights, and I am going to protect my investments. She turned back to face the room. I am going to fight this to the death. The room fell silent as Karen slammed the door behind her. I looked around at my neighbors, seeing a mixture of shock, anger, and relief on their faces. For the first time in years, they had seen Karen Thompson lose control, and they had seen the truth about what she had been doing to their community. The county inspector arrived on a Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after the HOA meeting. David Martinez was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had been investigating property disputes for over 20 years. He carried a clipboard, a measuring tape, and a camera, along with copies of all the documentation I had provided to the county. Ms. Johnson, I want to walk through your property and document everything we discussed on the phone, he said. I also want to take precise measurements of all the structures that have been built on your land. We started at the back fence line and worked our way forward. David used a professional surveying tool to confirm the exact boundaries of my property, then photographed every structure Karen had built on my side of the line. The outdoor kitchen, the patio extension, the shed, and the fence that blocked my access to my own backyard. This is pretty clear-cut, David said, making notes on his clipboard. These structures are entirely on your property, and you have documentation showing you never gave permission for their construction. As we were measuring the outdoor kitchen, Karen appeared at her back door. She had been watching us from her window, and I could see she was agitated. She walked over to the fence line and called out to David. Excuse me, who are you and what are you doing on my property? David looked up from his measuring tape. I am David Martinez from the County Code Enforcement Office. I am investigating a property dispute, and actually, I am standing on Ms. Johnson's property, not yours. Karen's face went white. There must be some mistake. I have been maintaining this area for years. I have permission from the previous owners. Ma'am, I have reviewed the county records. There is no filed agreement giving you permission to use this property. These structures are in violation of county property codes. I have invested thousands of dollars in these improvements. You cannot just come here and tell me to tear them down. David remained calm and professional. Ma'am, property investment does not grant ownership rights. If you have built structures on property you do not own, those structures are in violation of county code regardless of their cost. Karen tried a different approach. The previous owners were perfectly happy with the arrangement. They appreciated the improvements I made to their property value. The previous owners are no longer the legal owners of this property. Ms. Johnson is the current owner, and she has not given permission for these structures. I watched Karen's face cycle through emotions: confusion, anger, desperation, and finally calculation. She was trying to figure out how to manipulate this situation, But David was not a neighbor she could intimidate or an HOA board she could control. "I want to speak to your supervisor," Corinne said. "You are welcome to contact my office, but the property boundaries are not a matter of opinion. They are established by legal survey and county records." David finished his measurements and took several dozen photographs. He then walked over to Corinne's house and knocked on the door. When she answered, he handed her an official document. "Mrs. Thompson, this is a formal notice of code violation. You have 30 days to remove all structures from Ms. Johnson's property or face county enforcement action." Corinne read the document with growing horror. 30 days. I cannot tear down thousands of dollars worth of improvements in 30 days. This is ridiculous. The timeline is standard for property violations. If you need additional time, you can file an appeal with the county board. "I am going to hire a lawyer. I am going to fight this." "That is your right, ma'am. But the structures will need to be removed regardless of any legal action you choose to take." Corinne hired an attorney within 48 hours, an expensive lawyer from downtown who specialized in property disputes and HOA law. His strategy was to claim that Corinne had established adverse possession rights through her years of maintaining the property. The legal battle lasted 3 months. Corinne's attorney argued that she had been using the property openly and continuously for over 5 years, which under state law could grant her ownership rights. My attorney countered that adverse possession required hostile use of the property, and that Corinne had initially claimed she had permission from the previous owners. The court case revealed even more of Corinne's fraudulent behavior. During discovery, we learned that Corinne had been coaching neighbors to lie about the property arrangements. She had created fake documents backdated to support her claims. Most damaging of all, she had been using HOA funds to pay for her legal defense. The judge was not impressed. "Mrs. Thompson, your claims of adverse possession are undermined by your own statements that you had permission to use the property. You cannot claim hostile possession while simultaneously claiming you had the owner's consent." The court ruling was decisive. Corinne had no legal right to any part of my property. All structures had to be removed within 72 hours, or the county would remove them at Corinne's expense. Corinne's lawyer made one final desperate argument. "Your Honor, my client has invested over $20,000 in these improvements. Surely there is some compensation due for the increase in property value." The judge looked at Corinne with obvious disdain. "Mrs. Thompson, you chose to make improvements to property you did not own, without permission from the legal owner. The law does not protect people who choose to invest in property they have no right to use." He turned to me. "Ms. Johnson, you are entitled to use of your entire property as legally defined. Mrs. Thompson has 72 hours to remove all structures, or county enforcement will remove them at her expense." Corinne left the courtroom in tears. Her expensive lawyer had cost her thousands of dollars and achieved nothing. The county had the authority to bulldoze everything she had built, and she would have to pay for the demolition. That evening, I received a call from David Martinez. "Ms. Johnson, Mrs. Thompson has been contacted about the 72-hour deadline. If she does not begin removal by Friday morning, we will bring in county equipment to handle the demolition." I asked what would happen if Corinne tried to interfere with the county workers. "That would be obstruction of justice. She would be arrested." Friday morning was 2 days away. I had a feeling Corinne was not going to go quietly. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of overcast sky that made everything look stark and serious. I woke up at 6 a.m. to the sound of heavy diesel engines rumbling down Maple Ridge Drive. The county had arrived with a full demolition crew, 2 bulldozers, a dump truck, and a crew of workers in hard hats and safety vests. I made coffee and positioned myself at my bedroom window, which gave me a perfect view of the drama that was about to unfold. The county crew was efficient and professional. They parked their equipment on the street and began unloading tools and safety equipment. David Martinez arrived in his county vehicle and spoke with the crew chief, pointing toward the structures that needed to be removed. Corinne's house remained dark and quiet. I wondered if she was going to try to avoid the confrontation by staying inside. But at exactly 7 a.m., as the bulldozers fired up their engines, Corinne's front door flew open. She ran outside in her bathrobe and slippers, her hair uncombed and her face twisted with rage and panic. "Stop! You cannot do this. This is my property." David Martinez approached her calmly. "Mrs. Thompson, we spoke about this. You have had 72 hours to remove these structures yourself. Since you chose not to comply, the county is handling the removal." "I am calling the police. This is destruction of private property." "Ma'am, these structures are built on Ms. Johnson's private property without her permission. We are removing them at the direction of the county court." Corinne pulled out her phone and started dialing frantically. "Hello, 911. There are people with bulldozers destroying my property. I need police here immediately." The bulldozer operator, a man who had clearly done this kind of work before, began positioning his equipment near the outdoor kitchen. The massive machine looked like a mechanical dinosaur as it maneuvered into position, its steel blade gleaming in the morning light. "Please, you have to stop," Corinne screamed at the operator. "I have $20,000 invested in this. You cannot just destroy it." The operator looked at David, who nodded. The bulldozer lurched forward, and the steel blade made contact with the elaborate stone countertop. The sound was incredible, like thunder mixed with breaking glass. $20,000 worth of outdoor kitchen equipment was reduced to rubble in 30 seconds. Corinne fell to her knees in the wet grass, sobbing, "My kitchen, my beautiful kitchen." The bulldozer did not stop. It moved methodically from structure to structure, destroying everything Corinne had built on my property. The fire pit, the decorative stonework, the storage shed, the fence that had blocked my access to my own backyard. Each structure disappeared under tons of steel and mechanical power. "This is not legal," Corinne screamed, pulling out her phone again. "I am calling Channel 7 News. I am calling the mayor. I am calling my congressman." She actually did call the local news station. A reporter and camera crew arrived within an hour, expecting to find a story about county overreach or property rights violations. Instead, they found a woman in her bathrobe having a complete breakdown while county workers cleaned up the remnants of her illegal construction project. The reporter interviewed David Martinez, who explained the situation calmly and professionally. "Mrs. Thompson built these structures on property she does not own, without permission from the legal owner. When she refused to remove them voluntarily, the county stepped in to enforce the court order." Corinne tried to present her side of the story, but she was nearly incoherent with rage and grief. "They are destroying my life. I have given everything to this community. I have invested everything I have." The reporter asked the obvious question. "Mrs. Thompson, if you knew this was not your property, why did you build these structures?" Corinne's response was telling. "I have been maintaining this area for years. I have made it beautiful. I have every right to protect my investment." She still did not understand that you cannot invest in property you do not own, and expect legal protection for that investment. Even in her moment of complete defeat, she could not admit that she had been wrong. The police arrived around 10 a.m., responding to Corinne's 911 call. The officer spoke with Davy.